Okay, so there's been this trend on YouTube for a while now, where people make these types of videos called Iceberg videos, where in any pertaining franchise or specific video game, the video starts with some trivial facts, and the longer you watch, the deeper the iceberg gets, with more wild trivia and theories from the said franchise or game that's being covered. And usually by the end of the videos, you're sitting there kind of questioning whether these crazy conspiracy theories around a video game like Mario, for example, can be true. And overall, it's just a really fun genre that kind of takes things from 1 to 1,000 pretty quickly. But before we jump into it, guys, we finally officially made it as YouTubers. This video is in fact sponsored by, drumroll please, get the trumpets ready, Raid Shadow Legends. Okay, at this point, it's very unlikely you haven't already heard of Raid Shadow Legends because they're literally one of the biggest games out there, and they have a ton of different champions that you can play as. Over 600 now. But one thing that's really cool is that this game has an insane amount of different bosses that you can go up and battle against. Like, let's look at this boss. The Guardian of the Void Keep, Malik Kavar. This guy actually has an interesting backstory. At one point, he was a priest of the light, and then he was stargazing, and then thought that the stars wouldn't be as cool without the darkness, making the stars look cool. Him thinking about the darkness got him in trouble with the fellow priests, and they kicked him out of the cool priest club. Now, this dude puts out a ton of poison, which can wipe your entire team if you're not careful, so the main strategy here will be to either run a cleanse debuff or some sort of shield buff to get through this. Now, some of the main things that we like about the game is that there is a deep story and lore around the universe, and there's a ton of really cool looking champions and bosses that you can see when you play through the game. Raid Shadow Legends constantly has new events and champions coming out, like a spooky Halloween champion coming out soon. And if you want to get a bigger head start, all you have to do is click on the link in the description or scan this QR code right here, and new players get this hero Chonoru, who is amazing in Doom Tower, 200k in silver, 1 XP boost, 1 energy refill, and 1 Ancient's Shard, so you can summon an awesome champion as soon as you get in game. You'll find your rewards here for the next 30 days only, and we'll see you guys all in game. Now, of course, the Halo community has a couple great Halo Iceberg videos already. That's if you consider yourself a normie. Okay, I'm only halfway joking. Like I said, these videos do a great job at going 1 to 100 in depth when it comes to the Halo Iceberg, and Luke and I have been wondering how we wanted to approach a video like this for quite some time, and we realized that when it comes to Rocket Sloth and Halo, we can't just start at surface level trivia and conspiracy theories. We're going straight from the 1,000, taking it to 1,000,000 meters deep in this iceberg. We're going all the way down to the Titanic, and that there was a Halo 2 creator that was actually on the Titanic and may have died on the Titanic, and then there was a clone. Like, these conspiracies are the conspiracies that are next level off of the deep end. So while other people have great iceberg videos out there, just consider this a headfirst dive into the deepest end that you may not have even known existed. Now, of course, there's some great surface level conspiracy theories from the Halo, things like Noble 6 living in a cave on Reach still, or perhaps the secret mysterious messages that may or may not be hidden in the Halo 3 ODST glyphs. At this point, as far as we're concerned, this is just surface level conspiracy theories. We're going way deeper. So starting things off, if you've played Halo Combat Evolved, a lot of you may remember the moment where Keyes gives Master Chief the Magnum, but have you ever stopped to really read between the lines and listen very carefully to the dialogue that happens with Keyes?
I don't keep it loaded, son. You'll have to find ammo as you go.
Did you catch it? We'll play it again just to be sure.
I don't keep it loaded, son. You'll have to find ammo as you go.
Sure, Jacob Keyes could be referring to Master Chief as a son just out of a sign of respect, but what if it was more meant to be written in a very literal sense? Could Jacob Keyes be trying to subtly hint that he is in fact Master Chief's father? This is one of the most interesting theories that probably no one has really ever thought about, and it really does make sense why. Now, in Halo The Fall of Reach, we do know for a fact that Jacob Keyes was the escort to Catherine Halsey when she went to scope out John when he was playing on a playground, and we have seen a lot of people draw comparisons to Catherine Halsey being this maternal figure to Master Chief in the past. We also know that Catherine Halsey and Jacob Keyes had a thing for a minute and also had a daughter. Yeah, I don't really know where we're going with this one, but you know what? Can we just like feed this theory to new players who are playing Combat Evolved for the first time and just see if this ever catches on anywhere? Because I just think it's genius. Okay, we're only going to go deeper from here. But if we're going crazy deep into Halo conspiracy theories, we can't go much deeper than talking about Halo fan and conspiracy theorist Shabiggles. Now, this dude's been very active in the Rocket Sloth community for quite some time, posting theories on Reddit, on Discord, kind of jumping on board when our channel was getting a lot of views from the ODST glyph search. And I gotta tell you, Shabiggles has a knack for coming up with these theories that you would just never even remotely think would be anything that anyone would come up with, and it's incredibly interesting to look through the process of how these theories come to the surface. Okay, we mentioned at the beginning of this video, the Halo 2 developer was actually on the Titanic theory. This one is a classic from Shabiggles. So long story short, no context. About 8 months ago, Shabiggles posted this Wikipedia page to the Halo Circle Jerk subreddit and simply theorized that this man, John Jacob Astor IV, who mind you died in 1912, is in fact real world Halo 2 lead developer at Bungie, Jason Jones. Now, Jacob Astor IV was actually the richest man to have died aboard the Titanic. And in his post, Shabiggles speculated that Nikola Tesla cloned this guy after they collected the frozen body from the water, and that clone is now modern day Jason Jones. Now, we've talked about this theory on our podcast before, and we definitely thought that this was just an elaborate troll at first, but there was something just so weird about this post that the more I started to look into just the little nuanced wording and the Wikipedia article on John Jacob Astor IV, I started to realize that as crazy as this theory sounds, Shabiggles has the incredible skill of being able to throw something absolutely crazy out there and then follow it up with different links and connections that you would not think of if you were trying your hardest to just make up a fake theory. Like, let's suspend reality for a second and just look at what could possibly make these connections between the Titanic and actual Halo 2's Jason Jones. Now, after our podcast speculating on Shabiggles' theories, I did end up reaching out to the dude just to try to get some more elaboration, and that's where I really saw these connections start to form that I never would have thought of. Now, while John Jacob Astor actually comes from a long line of wealth through real estate, Astor IV was actually very notable for writing a science fiction novel all the way back in 1894. And the story is set in the year 2000, which is, of course, over 100 years after the book was written, but the book follows humankind's exploration of space in the attempt to find new planets to colonize one day. And in the book, they travel to Jupiter and Saturn, and Astor IV's book is actually the first ever use of the word spaceship, which is kind of cool. Now, Astor was technically known also for some of his inventions and was also supposedly friends with Nikola Tesla. That gets a little confusing here because Tesla, while he did have a ton of crazy inventions and crazy ideas that never really were made during his time alive, how the whole cloning thing would work kind of is a little bit ambiguous. Though in the 2006 movie The Prestige and the book that it's based on, Nikola Tesla does accurately make a cloning device. So, I mean, there's some loose connection there. So what does Jacob Astor have to do with the Halo franchise? Well, I don't know. Probably nothing. Project Astor was the code name for a series of biochemical and biomechanical augmentation procedures applied to the Spartan 2 conscripts at the onset of puberty. In an interview in 2010, Bungie's creative director Marcus Leto compared Halo Reach to the Titanic, saying, "Reach is like Titanic. We know the end from the beginning. Reach is going to fall and 700 million people are going to perish as a result." Okay, these are all just fun stretches, obviously, and not anything that could be concrete to come up with a real theory. But I just wanted to point out how Shabiggles is able to draw these connections, even something as similar as just the play on words between John Jacob Astor and Jason Jones, to find some semblance of evidence where no one else can find anything. Which brings us in to the next theory that I wanted to take a closer look at. And this is something that I've been wondering about for quite some time, especially more recently as the story in the Destiny universe has progressed. rest a bit more. What if, now hear me out, what if there is a separate Bungieverse that exists that includes the Halo multiverse, specifically the ones that Bungie worked on, and Destiny, and other games that Bungie's worked on like Marathon, all in this one multiverse that's separate from the main Halo universe that we know and that's led by 343 right now. It sounds silly, but what if there are some connections alluding to this being a thing? Like, for instance, does anyone remember Bungie's Marathon before Halo? The Marathon logo shows up all over the place in the Halo franchise. It shows up on Forerunner structures, it shows up on the Pillar of Autumn, it shows up on the amazing security helmet's forehead. In Destiny, this weapon is a direct callback to the Marathon game. There's Marathon achievements for talking to terminals in Halo 3, which is the main thing you did in Marathon, run around and talk to terminals. And of course, you were rewarded the Marathon helmet called Security, which is an obvious homage to the helmet from the Marathon games. Halo 3 ODST has a Destiny poster, which only shows up in Bungie's release of Halo 3 ODST. The Marathon helmet is actually being added into Destiny as a part of the big Bungie anniversary spectacular extravaganza thing at the end of this year. There's a Master Chief homage to Chief being in cryosleep in Destiny 1, and of course, the song Siege of Madrigal is a song that shows up in Myth, Halo, and Destiny 1. And with Bungie kind of approaching this time travel idea or this multiple timeline thing with the Vex in Destiny more and more, which obviously is showing some interesting callbacks to the Marathon series. And of course, there was all of those rumors that maybe there would be some Halo nods coming up in the future for this big event at the end of the year. What if the Bungieverse is kind of this ever-branching timeline that continues to split off, but all exist on the same plane in one way or another? And when it came to Halo, there was this beginning and end with the Bungie Halo timeline, something that started with Halo Reach chronologically and ended with Halo 3 and Master Chief going into cryosleep. You could even use that slip space jump at the end of Halo 3 as a big marking point here, where after that, Master Chief's story is continued separately in a different place, taken over by 343 Industries. Maybe in this Bungieverse, Master Chief is still in cryosleep and he never wakes up again, or just hasn't woken up yet. But in the 343 universe, we see Halo restarted in its brand new timeline and universe separate from the Bungieverse, where we see Halo 4 take place, the Halo anniversary games, with the subtle changes along the way that were made to those games, like the poster referencing Destiny being removed in Master Chief Collection. And the Halo canon that we know now is this separate timeline or universe that exists on its own right. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have connections to the Bungie timeline or universe that's already created, but obviously for the sake of making a fun conspiracy theory or fan theory about multiple universes in the Halo Bungieverse, just to visualize this better, I'd like to think of it as one of those CD cases where there's two different spots where you can put two CDs in it, and on one CD, we have the Bungieverse, and that's everything that Bungie has put into their own sprawling universe. And then the back CD is like a copy and paste of the Halo tracks from the Bungieverse, but then a bunch of new tracks also added on, and maybe they remixed a Halo 3 ODST poster along the way too. I know it's a dumb allegory, it's a dumb theory, but I just am really enjoying it, just running away with this. And then again, maybe these multiple universes are more connected than we thought. For instance, if we look at one end with the Master Chief Collection, adding in subtle homages to Destiny through weapon skins. I mean, these skins straight up reference the Vex, which are known for their time travel, and the Scorn, which, I don't know, exist. Maybe these two universes are no longer in separate CD players, but now back in the same case once again. I don't know, this is my first time trying to form some deep iceberg theory here, but I feel like we're onto something fun, and I decided let's take it a step further and get some feedback from Shabiggles himself and see if maybe there's some more connections that we're just obviously missing, and oh boy, are there. Besides the fact that Marathon served as some level of inspiration for Halo, where You serve as this super soldier running around in space, running up to talk to some female AIs whenever you get the free chance. Marathon has a lot of really interesting plot threads and themes that come up time and time again throughout some of the content that Bungie has worked on. But there's one AI in particular that serves a very important role throughout the Marathon story. That's Traxus 4. Now, Traxus 4 in itself is this huge rabbit hole that is impossibly deep to try to figure out in one segment of a video, but essentially Traxus is this AI that ends up going rampant and then immediately starts consuming other AIs or something like that. I don't know, Shabiggles went in deep with some of these connections between Traxus, Marathon, and Halo and Destiny. There's a ton of thematic similarities between Traxus and Mendicant Bias, the way that Traxus and the Vex have similar time travel capabilities. Oh, and the term Traxus is just plastered on a ton of industrial tech throughout the Halo franchise, as Traxus serves as this company in the Halo universe. I don't know. I would love to dive into the Bungieverse even closer one day in the future. So if this is something super interesting to you and you're really interested in Marathon lore and you want to help make connections to the Halo universe for a potential collaboration in the future, maybe join our Discord or something. I don't know. We'll put a discussion up. Let's just switch gears a little bit and go with something a little bit lighter than this deep rabbit hole we just fell into for the last few minutes or so. Okay, in Halo Reach, a lot of people always thought that George here was saying mom to Halsey when really he was saying ma'am. Or was he? What if he was in fact saying mom because Catherine Halsey is George's mother or something? Would that make Master Chief George's half-brother? I mean, they were Spartan 2s together. Maybe there's this secret family portrait of all of them just around somewhere. But hey, at least this is better than some fan fiction that some members of the Halo community have managed to make. I also love it when the community comes together and comes up with something very interesting or unique in one way or another. Not too long ago, we did a video where we looked at all of the birds across the Halo franchise, and we noticed these seagulls just chilling in like every possible corner of the Halo universe in one way or another. And I gotta give credit where credit is due. On the Halo subreddit, user I'm Diffusing literally just went on this goose chase trying to come up with all the potential and possible theories as to why seagulls are all over the place in the Halo universe. Now, I'm Diffusing wanted to explore why you see seagulls on places like High Charity or on Tempest, even though they're a Covenant ship and a Halo ring respectively. They managed to come up with 3 possible theories here. First, we have the stowaway theory, which, and I'll be doing some quoting from the post here, points out that historically speaking, ships faring to other countries and regions have inadvertently carried pests along with their cargo. For example, for centuries, rats have stowed away on human ships and were inadvertently transported into new habitats before then asserting themselves into the ecosystem and then dominating it. So who knows? Maybe this happened with seagulls. They also presented the theory of Forerunner conversion measures, which essentially follows the theory that possibly seagulls were a protected species under the Forerunner conservation measure. While it seems unlikely, maybe the seagulls were this sacred bird type creature that the Forerunners decided they needed to save before lighting off all the Halo rings, and thus seagulls were preserved and rescued. This one's my favorite. Or we could look into the other theory that I'm Diffusing set up, which was the convergent evolution theory, which essentially points out that it's been observed that over history, separate organisms with different lineages evolved to possess very similar features. They then point out dolphins and sharks as they're similar, but they're also kind of different. They then go on to point out that if you trace a dolphin's genome and family tree, you can actually see that dolphins are more closely related to mammals than how close something like a shark would be. This one just suggests that seagull evolution is pretty impressive, and that just evolving into a seagull is probably your safest bet for survival. I don't think that's the real point they're making, but I'm just gonna, kind of add that one in there. Okay, next question is, how crazy would it be for the Halo universe to have some sort of secret organization operating in the underground, pulling all of the strings, making big decisions that not a lot of people actually know about? I know a lot of you guys are gonna point to Oni because they have a shady track record. But at the same time, we all know about Oni. So how secret can that be? What if there was like a Halo universe type Illuminati operating behind the scenes, but also right in front of us at the same time, and we didn't even notice it. In Halo 2, if you're playing on Outskirts, you may notice this poster for Fluke of the Narwhal, which is actually a Fist of the Unicorn cover band. Now, Fist of a Unicorn was a band made up of crewmen from the UNSC Pillar of Autumn. So what's so special about this band? Well, there's definitely something nuanced about the fact that these were crewmen of the Pillar of Autumn, and it seemed like most members of the Pillar of Autumn did not make it off of the Halo ring. Yet, there's this fictional propaganda film that shows up in Halo 5 Guardians that insinuates that the band is involved in some way or another in working on the music for the movie. So we know that these guys were somehow spared from the Halo ring in the same way that some people maneuver their way through Squid Game, working all these secret plots and whatnot. But let's look at Fist of the Unicorns a little bit closer. FOTUS? I mean, I guess the S isn't really there, but still, it spells out FOTUS. Now, the FOTUS armor permutation for Spartans in the Halo lore was created at an RTC facility by utilizing loose Forerunner technology and merging it with base Mjolnir architecture. It was then tested at the 434 Combat Readiness Lab located in Kirkland, Washington, which totally isn't a play on 343 Industries by any means, located in Kirkland, Washington. But according to Halopedia, it's developed for highly experienced Spartan 4s by none other than the Office of Naval Intelligence, also known as ONI. Coincidence that this brings us back to the band Fist of the Unicorn that somehow survived on the Pillar of Autumn? I think not. Okay, so what if the Arbiter story isn't as cut and dry as maybe the Halo games make us think it is? If we look closely in Halo 2 to some of the happenings and the extended lore explaining what's going on during some of the Prophet's decisions during the course of Halo 2, some things are very interesting if you take a close look. Firstly, Halo 2 opens up with what seems like regret, making a hasty and uneducated decision to attack Earth, not realizing that Earth literally is the planet that humans are from. Now, we also know from the extended Halo lore that the Prophet of Truth not only knew that Earth's attack would be a failure, but actually had set up an entire secondary attack waiting for the Prophet of Regret's inevitable failure, but also used the failure to manipulate and consolidate the power between three prophets by essentially allowing Regret to be taken out of the picture. The Prophet of Truth is a very sneaky prophet, and he definitely is the mastermind behind the Covenant. And even through Halo 2, it's easy enough to see what's going on. Even Cortana points out what's going on when you're riding in the little underwater elevator. So we do wonder, was the Prophet of Mercy just completely oblivious to everything that the Prophet of Truth was doing, especially in regards to kind of eliminating one of their core leaders? I mean, the Prophet of Mercy is the oldest and wisest of the three prophets, so it does seem a little weird that this would go completely under his nose without even catching a whiff of what's going on. Now, another interesting thing to point out, the Prophet of Mercy and the Prophet of Regret were the two prophets that had favored the elites, where the Prophet of Truth had favored the brutes because the brutes didn't ask questions and just kind of believed and went with whatever they were told. Now, of course, this is just a crazy conspiracy theory all the way down in the depths of the iceberg, but what if the Arbiter, while yes, was sent on the mission to retrieve the activation index, also maybe privately had an ulterior contingency mission assigned to him by the Prophet of Mercy in the case of Mercy's sudden death within the following days? If you look at the conflict between the brutes and the elites, after the Arbiter gets yeeted into the hole and then talks to Gravemind for a bit and then comes back on Uprising, this all-out war fully begins. But could it be possible that the Arbiter, throughout the rest of Halo 2 and into the events of Halo 3, was actually on a secret mission assigned to him by the Prophet of Mercy as this contingency plan specifically to assassinate the Prophet of Truth at all costs? This theory could go even deeper, suggesting that the Arbiter's decisions to join the Master Chief and to follow the Prophet of Truth to the Ark isn't necessarily out of the good spirit of trying to save save the universe and all life, but maybe just this, no matter what, take the shot on truth one way or another. He might not even care if the ring ends up getting activated or not, as long as his mission to take out the Prophet of Truth because of the Prophet of Mercy's assignment be the main motivating factor. The indifference for the actual Great Journey would be really interesting to explore if more evidence in later Halo games ever did suggest that, though it would also kind of ruin the Arbiter character and part of his arc if that was in fact the case, and probably would become a little bit more unpopular. And we like the Arbiter the way that he is because he's pretty cool and noble and stuff. I don't know. While we obviously prefer the Arbiter in the way that he's portrayed, it is at least fun to think of this alternate what-if universe where we have a super pragmatic Arbiter just on a dead set mission to take out truth at all costs. Could be a really cool, like, fracture story that's not canon or something. I don't know. Or who knows? Maybe it is actually the case. I guess we won't really ever know. Okay, this next one though is actually a real mystery in the Halo universe, and it has lore to back it up. So this is of course one that we still don't know the full details to. However, as many of you know, the I Love Bees audiolog story is one of my favorite pieces of Halo fiction beyond the games. But there's one detail that's introduced in I Love Bees that hasn't been elaborated on since, and it is somewhat of a big deal. After the initial Spartan 2s were made, the ones with Master Chief and the rest of Blue Team like we know, there was in fact development on a second class of Spartan 2s that, while the second class was smaller, candidates were kidnapped as children and were trained for years and then later sent into augmentation. Now we know about this because the AI, Melissa, was actually a Flash clone created from the brain of one of the Spartans who died during the augmentation process. I Love Bees follows this character's brother quite a bit through also, besides the AI's adventures through 2004 cyberspace. But what Yasmin or Melissa's story tells us is the fact that we do know of another Spartan program that actually was happening simultaneously to the Spartan 3 program. The Spartans that we all know from Halo Reach, with the exception of Jorge. We know Oni was funding its own Spartan project that was different, using volunteer soldiers, but during all of that there was another class of Spartan 2s. We know that a lot of the funding for the Spartan 2 project was drained and reallocated to the Spartan 3 program, which officially started in 2531, but Yasmin, the Spartan from the 2.5 or Spartan 2 class 2 program, died in augmentation in 2545, which would have been 14 years after the Spartan 3 program already had started. Outside of Yasmin, we only know of one other Spartan who was a part of this second wave of Spartan 2s, which is Spartan Nicole 458, whose only appearance is actually in Dead or Alive 4 as a character, which is classified as a non-canon appearance, though the character in Dead or Alive 4 is based on a canon character from the Halo mythos. So literally all we know is that this character exists, and that's about it. And then technically the only other character that almost became a Spartan 2.5 or in that second class of Spartan 2s would have been another I Love Bees character, Jan, who was a candidate who was going to be abducted, though Jan's father, who was from the Orion project, also known as Spartan 1s, actually stopped the abductor, so she never ended up actually becoming a Spartan 2, and then later on she becomes like a space pirate or something. If this story is interesting, you should look at our entire video breakdown we did on I Love Bees, because it's one of our favorite videos we've ever done, and it's a really good watch if you just like these forgotten stories from the older Halo lore. So while we know that a lot of the Spartan 2.5s ended up dying during the augmentation process, and that it wasn't anything that was necessarily as elaborate or organized as the initial first class, we do know to an extent that some Spartan 2s from that second class did survive augmentation and did end up going into combat. So what ended up happening to these Spartans? It's a very interesting story that I would love to see more of elaborated elaborated sometime in the future. Just this forgotten snippet of Halo history. Okay, we want to maybe cover more conspiracy theories in the future when it comes to Halo. So if you have a conspiracy theory, whether it's very deep and rabbit hole like, or just very low stakes and surface level, please do leave it in the comments down below, because maybe we'll pick your conspiracy theory and just dive into it in a future video. But otherwise, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. You can join our Discord to discuss some of these conspiracy theories. Links in the description down below. We'll see you all next time with a brand new video.